Greetings and felicitations. This is Michael Haspel. I have a pretty special episode of QFD coming up. It is taken from a series of lectures I've given on how to use tabletop board games and stuff like that to improve your writing or to help with your writing. And I thought it would be an easy format to do for this particular case. This is a test case I did driving up to a friend's book signing. And it's a test I did just to allow me to put out more content more frequently. And if this does work and folks find it useful, we would not do every QFD like this, obviously, but we could just do occasional stuff, the stuff that I can talk off the top of my head and I don't need notes for. So they would most likely be shorter episodes. This one actually is kind of long because I went up there and back. But then again, I know this subject intimately and just can talk about it no matter what. So if you guys like this or don't like it or whatever, hit me up on Patreon or on Messenger or whatever, and just let me know. Let me know how it works. Hit me up in the comments, and since I recorded this, I actually picked up some different equipment to record while driving, more geared towards narrating a book for a transcription service. But I have like a closer microphone and an H4n recorder that will allow me to record stuff better. This was actually recorded using my Apple Watch, so which I'm amazed by the quality I got from the freaking Apple Watch. It's unbelievable, and it is a testament to modern technology. Well, without further ado, we'll give you how to use tabletop games to improve your writing. Enjoy.
This is Dropkick with a red dash alpha message in 2 parts. Break.
5, 4, 3. Hands on keys. Turn. We're going to try to do this. So this is going to be a slightly different format than what I normally do. I'm recording this on the 29th of February, 2020. So leap day, leap year. It was kind of cool. Why this is going to be a different kind of format is because I'm actually recording this on a drive up to a friend's book signing, Wendy Terrian. Her stuff is actually pretty good. Look it up. And it is kind of a haul from Colorado Springs to Denver. So I figured I would try to multitask and record a quick episode of QFD at the same time. And what's driving me to this is I went to a productivity seminar run by Kevin Anderson. And you guys don't know him. He writes like the Dune books. He's written a ton of like Star Wars books, tie-in fiction all over the place and everything like that. I think he has like 120 some odd books to his name, and that's probably underselling him. So I attended this. Well, it wasn't just a seminar for that. It was a conference called Superstars 2020 Symposium in Colorado Springs. And I was really, really impressed. The number of people that attended, all the faculty that attended had serious credentials to their name. Kevin Anderson being one of them, Jim Butcher, Dan Wells. I know I'm going to forget a ton of people. I'm not going to try to list everybody who was there. Eric Flint, but some really notable folks that have a lot of background and everything. And they were, it was a business-oriented conference. Not so much craft-oriented, although they did have a craft day that came beforehand, which unfortunately, due to the day job, I had to miss. And I would highly recommend going. It is a little pricey. If anybody is interested, contact me. I got a coupon for $100 off the tuition. So that's actually pretty cool. In any case, Kevin narrates a lot of his books. And when I first heard this, I thought, okay, whatever. He's just kind of just saying, and then this happens, blah, 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 and then this happens, and then this happens. And then he sends it off to some kind of transcription service, and they do the writing. That's what I thought. And that is not at all what happens. He had a sample that he played, and it sounded like an audiobook, except that he was spelling out, sometimes he was spelling out the punctuation, or he was spelling out names that needed to be spelled out a certain way. And it was incredibly impressive. And he narrates these books while he's hiking around Colorado Springs. So I was like, wow, I could think of a lot worse ways of spending my time and increasing productivity. I mean, it's one of the reasons why he can produce as much as he can. And he has the details on how to do all this in a book that he has on Amazon. It's part of the $1 Million Productivity series, and I think it is called On Becoming a Dictator. And obviously, since I'm driving, I don't have notes or anything like that, so I have to go off of memory. I will provide a link in the show notes back when I get home. And just so folks know, I'm not sitting here with a whole microphone rig and everything like that trying to record this. I am actually using a hands-free device. I'm using my Apple Watch. So this is basically like having a one-sided phone call. And I feel a little bit like Jack Burton. It's like, hey, when the hearth fires start going low and the wind grows strong, just remember what old Jack Burton told you. It's a little surreal. So, what I wanted to talk about today is a presentation that I did at Life, the Universe, and Everything Symposium. It's LTUE. It is held annually in Provo, Utah. It's kind of co-sponsored by BYU. Very, very cool little conference. I've only gone a couple of years now and everything. Larry Correa turned me on to it. And it is fantastic. It's a nice, small, intimate con. And it's a lot of fun. And this last year, I did a presentation. Yeah, I've done a lot of conferences like back to back, and it has really worn on me. And that's why there's been kind of a gap between QFDs. And I should probably do like a big old housekeeping, but I guess I'll just talk about it now. But yeah, so I have the next kind of side quest for Alex and Marcus is on submission. So that's cool, but it could be a while, so we're just waiting for that. And I'm working on a couple of other stories for a big-time publisher that I've been trying to work with for a while. So I'm not going to go into details on that. I don't want to jinx it, but it would be really, really cool. And it would be kind of a bucket list item for me. So I'm kind of fingers crossed for that. And then I went to a bunch of writers' conferences, including Superstars 2020 and LTUE, and I did those back to back, which was, I don't recommend it. It was intense. I wound up getting sick, and I was also working on some day job proposals at the same time in the hotel room in between panels. So that took a huge toll out of me. As you guys will also see if you go to the Patreon page, Patreon tiers have changed, and that's to reflect that I have not been putting out content as frequently as I started off putting out content, and that's going to be because there's going to be a format change to the show. I'm probably going to do less and less of the author interviews. It seems like just according to the metrics that folks weren't listening to those as much. So we're going to do more deep dive episodes and everything. And I do have another kind of format where we're going to compare and contrast two stories that are very, very similar and kind of try to figure out why maybe one works or one doesn't, or what works in both of them. And like a good example would be comparing the Steven Soderbergh Ocean's 11 to the original Ocean's 11 with Frank Sinatra, and how they updated it to be more modern, more sophisticated, and what worked and what didn't. And of course, and I don't want to get into like negative territory, but of course we're going to talk about movies that are soft reboots too, like The Force Awakens and Star Wars A New Hope, and what works and what didn't work in that, so that we can avoid pitfalls like that when we're trying to tell stories. So that's the goal that I will have there. It's not going to be to knock one story or knock another. I think there's enough negative stuff out there that if people will just want, somebody bashing a movie, they can find it. It's, there's entire YouTube channels that's all they do. I would rather take that in a productive direction and say, maybe why didn't this work? And let's explore that a little bit and see how maybe we could have fixed it. To me, that's more interesting and more productive. But anyway, to get back to the topic of this podcast, we are going to cover some ground that I've covered before a little bit. But this year I gave a talk at Life, the Universe, and Everything Symposium about how to use tabletop gaming to help your writing. And that's kind of what we want to go over. And I'm going to start off with some RPG stuff that we'll talk about, and then move into actual like board games that we'll talk about. And some of them are not entirely board games. Some of them are tools that you can use. And keep in mind, I'm going off the top of my head, so I may have to have like an addendum to this episode at the end where I go through and just correct every time I messed up and tell you the real names of things instead of just what I think they're called. And we'll have to go from there. So we'll just see. So one of the things I want to caution people about when we're going to be using tabletop gaming and role-playing games and stuff to help your writing is that you should use your writing time for your writing time and your gaming time for your gaming time. As writers, we tend to find any excuse to dissemble and to dodge actually sitting down, butt in seat, fingers on keyboard, and that's the only thing that's actually going to produce the work. You can sit there and do research forever. That's why researching and world building is so rewarding, is because you can do that forever. And you don't have to produce anything. But with very, very few exceptions, publishers do not buy worlds or research. They buy finished books. So at some point you have to put the research away and finish the books. So when I mention RPGs here and stuff, keep in mind that these are tools. You don't have to do it my way. These are things that work for me, that I use, and I don't even use all of these anymore. I've kind of moved on, and I have a set, very small set of tools that I use, and I use them repetitively because they work for me. So we're going to kick things off with RPGs, obviously. And everybody knows, or at least have heard of, Dungeons and Dragons. However, Dungeons and Dragons, if you're writing, say a romance novel or maybe a modern spy thriller or something like that, Dungeons and Dragons is not going to help you that much. And you want to be careful using D&D exclusively because, that's trademark stuff. So unless you're writing an actual Dungeons and Dragons tie-in novel, you probably don't want to use stuff like that exclusively. Now, I will caveat that and say, going way back, there was a source book for Advanced Dungeons & Dragons 2nd edition, and I want to say right now, I'll check it later, and I'll include a link. It's called the Wilderness Survival Guide. Now, this Wilderness Survival Guide was like just a source book, had a bunch of tables in it and everything, but it had all kinds of different stuff in there, like tables of information that were just like, if you're above the tree line at this altitude, how long would it take for somebody to freeze to death? It's actually in there. Or it would have tables for hunting. So if you're somebody who's just getting kind of stuck in the minutia and you want to have your hero go hunting or something, you can roll up what they hunted and what they caught. It's all right in there, and it was a really good resource. And if I'm not mistaken, you can go to Wizards of the Coast and D&D Beyond, and they have all the old PDFs out there. Getting a hardcover copy of this book at this point, other than on eBay, would probably be substantially hard, if not impossible. But that's one of the things I want to bring up. The other resource books that I would recommend are from Osprey Ebooks. Now, a lot of folks who don't do tabletop gaming may not be familiar with these books, but these are normally historical reference guides, but they go into absolute detail. I mean, it'll be, they'll have a book on like the winged hussars, of the Siege of Vienna and King Sobieski or something like that. But it's a little book. They usually run about $15 or something at your local game store. I'm sure Amazon and Barnes & Noble carry them. You can find this thing, and they are detailed to minutia. They go from either conflicts, wider conflicts, to down to specific units, like what buttons they had on their uniform, what their standards looked like, all kinds of different stuff. It's really good if you're writing like regimental kind of things, especially, anything historical. It goes, I think they do have stuff that go up to present day. And then on top of that, if you're looking for just stuff to kind of proof your work against, say, logical fallacies and plot holes, they actually create rule sets now for all kinds of different stuff, from the Civil War from the American Civil War to the English Civil War to future kind of warfare and everything like that. And they have real, think tank type people who have given this a lot of thought, so that when you're trying to like figure out how, say, some colonial marines might engage with, an unknown foe, the rules for the tabletop game are in there. You don't have to use them all, but it might give you some ideas on how a small unit in the future, armed with, various different weapons than we have now and capabilities than we have now, how they might react. So I would highly recommend Osprey Books. And the other source books I would recommend are from more storytelling RPGs like Fate and Savage Worlds. These are, Fate and Savage Worlds are more storytelling RPGs with some excellent mechanics. I tend to lean towards Fate over Savage Worlds because I like to play Savage Worlds, and Savage Worlds can get a little crunchy. So as far as like stats and everything go, whereas Fate, you can distill it really, really quickly, very easily down to something, and it won't interrupt your writing. Now, this get back to what I was saying about writers dissembling and wanting to do things. You do not have to teach yourself how to play Fate to use some of the tools in Fate. And the same goes for like Savage Worlds. You do not have to learn how to play Savage Worlds and play Savage Worlds, which is fun, and so is Fate, to use it to help your writing. You can just grab some tools that you need, some tools that you want, and adapt them. And what's cool about Savage Worlds and Fate is that they are agnostic to the setting. So you can use Fate to do, they have a game on the Dresden Files, right? Or you can use Fate to do superhero stuff. You can use it to do, anything you can imagine, from Star Wars to, science fiction games to D&D type games. It works for everything. And the same thing for Savage Worlds. It's a bunch of different settings, so you can use it for whatever you want. Now, the king baddie of these is called GURPS, and it stands for Generic Universal Role-Playing System. And if you buy the core book, you have everything you need to play in everything. But GURPS has been out for a long time. It's made by Steve Jackson Games, and they have come out with hundreds of source books for just about every setting you can imagine. So they have entire source books on weapons, on medieval weapons, on modern day firearms, on all kinds of stuff. And what's awesome about the GURPS source books, and in this day and age of Google, you might think, well, why do I need these? You know, I can just Google it or whatever. Well, in this day, GURPS has released, Steve Jackson Games has released the bibliographies of every one of these source books on Steve Jackson Games' website for free. So say you're writing a story about ancient Rome. You can just go on and look for GURPS Ancient Rome, which is a source book, and you just look for the bibliography. And all the books that the people used to research that ancient Rome book are there. So what's incredible about that is it not only tells you what people are expecting. You know, if you say that your book is set in ancient Rome and you've got all kinds of anachronisms, unless you can back that up with some real historical research or something, you're probably going to anger a lot of readers that are tied into the historical aspects of things. I mean, I've caught flack in my stuff because I used a phrase in one of my sentences that I said he steeled himself. You know, meaning that the guy like prepared himself for, but the story I was writing was set in ancient Egypt and steel had not been invented yet. So I caught a lot of flack for that. You can avoid a lot of that kind of stuff by using one of these GURPS source books to help you ground yourself and allow you to figure out what the readers are expecting. It also lets you know what tropes there are. Right? Because when you open up one of these source books, they're all there. Not only do you know what the readers are expecting, the readers are expecting these things because there are tropes. And not necessarily because they're cliches, but because there are tropes. And they're either expecting you to see that and adhere to it or subvert it in some way. And if you subvert a trope, you've got to do it and be smart about it. Otherwise, people are just going to be, you know, oh, you're subverting expectations. And that kind of carries negative connotations right now because other creators have done it so poorly. So I would definitely recommend going to check out the GURPS source books and at least the bibliographies on there. They are a wealth of information. They're available for free, and it's like a curated search. Instead of just typing it in to Google and going, oh, hey, this is everything I could possibly, you know, need, and you get, you know, even if you only stick to page 1, you're still getting like 26 different things, and it's too easy to go down a rabbit hole and waste your world building and research time. Because remember, our ultimate goal is to write the story, write the book, not to do research and world building. On top of that is I would recommend that if you are doing world building, if you're creating your own universe in your own world, take the format from one of these GURPS source books. You know, just the way they have it laid out and everything. Take the format, take the headers, and write yourself your own kind of GURPS source book that you can use, and it will be a great, invaluable reference guide for you to have. Kind of a world Bible that you can go back to go, oh, wait, did I say that sesterces were golden or silver? I don't remember, you know, and you can go back and check this, especially if you're writing a series. It would be something that I would almost say is mandatory if you're writing a series, so that you can remember if this character's eyes are blue or violet or brown, or how you describe stuff beforehand. The reason I would recommend doing it in a GURPS source book style format is that if your series does moderately well, you can turn right back around and create a source book for, say, Savage Worlds or Fate or GURPS and market that. Anything with an open gaming license. And that's more income for you on work you've already done. It's basically free money. You just polish it up, set it up, and target it for whatever role-playing game you're gonna target, and you can put out that supplement, and people will buy that stuff at cons. Absolutely. So it is something to think about on that front. The last subject I want to talk about, taking from like role-playing games, is success rolls, right? And so you can do something complicated like D&D or something like that, where you're rolling different dice for different actions and all that stuff. But I tend to just use fate dice. They're sometimes called fudge dice also. They're just dice with 2 sides are pluses, 2 sides are minuses, and 2 sides are blank. And when you roll them, you just get an instant look at, hey, is this a good thing or a bad thing? Oh, I got 2 pluses, a blank, and a minus. All right, so it's a positive thing that just happened. I just got 3 minuses and a blank. Okay, something really bad just happened. And I like to use an example from one of my own works from Graveyard Shift, right? So there's a scene in Graveyard Shift, and it has changed quite a bit. So you won't find the exact same scene. But there was a scene where I had Alex, my hero, who is an immortal pharaoh. So he's like supernatural mummy. And he is breaking into a bodega being held by a bunch of bad guy vampires. And the initial time that I wrote it the way I kind of wanted it to be, where Alex showed up, kicked in the door, had the gun in his hand, handled business, just took out all these guys, lickety-split, professional, right? He's been doing this for hundreds of years. His partner had already flanked around in the back, and between the two of them, it was like 15 seconds, and all the bad guys were dead, and it was over, right? So when I submitted that to my critique group, I got pushback, which surprised me because I thought it was a really, really badass scene. And the pushback I got was that it was too easy. And yeah, I had written it to show that our heroes were really competent, but then it just kind of lessened the stakes all around, because it was just like, oh, hey, your guys are so good and they're able to pull this off that where's the threat? You know, why should I be worried? Why should I be on the edge of my seat or anything? So I played around with it a little while, and I couldn't really figure out how to get it done. So I pulled out the Fate ladder, which is part of the Fate system, and it walks you through these pluses and minuses on the Fate dice. And I rolled, I just kind of role-played that scene out and went, okay, well, Alex is at the door, and he's getting ready to kick it in. So the first thing he's going to do is he's going to kick in the door. And then I rolled for success just to see what would happen, right? And I rolled like 3 minuses and a blank, which meant that, yeah, he kicked the door hard. He did not kick in the door. So now he's alerted everybody who is in the room that he's trying to come in, right? So on the second kick, he was able to kick in the door, and he entered in, but now the vampires on the inside knew he was coming, and they knocked the gun right out of his hand. And I rolled for that as well. And it was a series of just terrible, terrible rolls. And the scene went incredibly better, because now there were stakes. Marcus, his partner, still went around the back, still was handling business, but Alex was having a bad time of it. And I get a lot of comments on that scene in the book now, even though I have changed it quite a bit. I get a lot of comments from the book now that people are just like, man, this is pretty awesome. Like they thought it was really intense and realistic. And I thought, wow, that's cool. And it helped make my vampires, who even though were low tier in that scene, much more threatening. So for right now, I'm actually getting close to Littleton and traffic is picking up. So I'm going to drop off here and I'll pick up the podcast on the way home. And hopefully this will all work. And yeah, you can hear there's like motorcycles going by and everything. So I am no longer comfortable driving and doing this podcast. So I'm going to knock off for right now and hopefully pick it up on the way home. All right. Well, we're back. Driving back just past Parker, Colorado. So now I'm back on, I'm taking the leisurely Highway 83 route instead of I-25, which is perpetually under construction. And I-25 is literally like doing the trench run from Star Wars A New Hope right now. It's kind of just absolutely insane. So I am not doing that. I'm driving on 83, which is a nicer, kind of more laid back drive. And from Parker to Colorado Springs is it's pretty laid back, so there's not a lot of traffic and everything. And I am recording this on my iWatch, so it's just kind of neat. we'll see how it all works out and everything. So I apologize ahead of time for the audio quality not being up to snuff on the like the other podcasts were. But to jump back into the RPG discussion that we were having, there is after the success rolls, there's one more thing that you can take from RPGs that works really, really well. And that is character creation. And it may not be for your main character, but it might be for your peripheral characters or sidekicks or something like that. And there, GURPS has a system that I really, really like. And I would love to walk you guys through the whole development of how to do a character in GURPS. And that might be a future podcast or something, but right now we're just going to gloss right over the top of it. What GURPS does when they do a character is you get so many points to and that will determine what kind of level character you are, right? So the more points you have, the better you are. If you get a certain number of points, then that might be just an average human being. A little bit more points than that, you might be somebody who's average, but they don't have any superpowers or anything like that, but they're better than average at some things. So you'd get somebody like Indiana Jones, right? Where he is kind of just your average Joe, but he is inarguably better than most regular people. Or John McClane, that might, if he gets more points, he's kind of John McClane, it's like, and I mean, John McClane in Die Hard, not John McClane in the subsequent movies where he became tantamount to a superhero. So in the GURPS system, what happens is that you take these points and you have to allocate, you use them for different attributes and stuff, just like in D&D or something like that. But you allocate some to take advantages and disadvantages. And this is where I think it really shines for developing kind of literary characters, because you're not going to use the stats, right? Nobody really cares about the stats. Your character's going to do what your character needs to do for the plot or for the story to move on or whatever. But if you are generating a character, and again, this would work. It might be a good starting point for a main character, but I don't know that I would use it exclusively for a main character. But take somebody, we'll just create the most Marty Stew character we can, right? So we'll call him Butch Ubermensch, and he will be a former Navy SEAL, Army Ranger, Green Beret, anything you can, that kind of, MARSOC, anything you can kind of imagine, right? He is the best of the best. He's skilled in 9 different martial arts. He's mastered them. He knows how to use every weapon under the book, all this stuff. Well, those would be the advantages, right, that he gets from the advantage side of things in GURPS. But then there are disadvantages, right? And some of them may not seem like disadvantages, but they might be. So we start looking through disadvantages, and the first one we find is that is age, right? That's the first one that jumps out at us, age. So we're like, well, how could that be a disadvantage to this Navy SEAL, Army Ranger, Green Beret, Uber guy, right? Well, he might be 70 years old. Well, that certainly changes things, right? Granted, John Rambo's still up and about killing people, and Sylvester Stallone's well into his 70s, so... But it does slow him down, and it's going to change how he approaches situations. So you can make him, he's old. He's really old, right? So that's going to change the character fundamentally from what he was at the beginning. So now we give him another disadvantage, right, to balance out all these advantages. Another disadvantage might be that he's a stutterer. So he stutters when he talks, because of extensive amounts of PTSD he's had from all these, covert missions that he went on, and all these adventures, quote unquote, that he's had have damaged him psychologically, and he stutters now uncontrollably. He can't keep from stuttering. So, and then for a third disadvantage, we might pick, and this might not sound like a disadvantage to some people, but it would definitely be a disadvantage to the kind of story we're going to drop Butch Ubermensch in, right? Is that he's a pacifist. He has killed so many people throughout his life, and that he's sworn off the use of guns. He won't use guns, and he's a pacifist, and even though he is this kind of master of 9 different martial arts, he won't use any lethal techniques. He only uses non-lethal stuff. Well, now you start getting a character that when you drop him into the typical kind of like Rambo kind of story, he's not going to have the most easy time navigating that. And it's going to turn out to be a better story because of it. Because he's going to have to find different ways of dealing with things rather than just hopping on a 50 cal and just ending a whole ton of people. So that's one way you can use GURPS to use the advantages and disadvantages. And if you want to try that out, and I'll put the link in the show notes, that GURPS Lite, which is a light version of the rules, is available for free for download at stevejacksongames.com. I think it's in D23 or Warehouse 23 or something like that. That's what he calls all their digital download area. And I will definitely have links there because I'm not sure I think it's Warehouse 23. But that works very, very well. The other thing I use for character creation, specifically for side characters or characters that might only be in 1 or 2 scenes, so they don't need to be as fleshed out, is I use Fate, but I use Fate Accelerated, which is a sped up kind of a shorthanded version of Fate. And it's really, really cool. And it involves a bunch of different approaches. I think it's 8 different approaches that characters can take. And so they're like careful or flashy or sneaky or forceful. And they have just these different approaches. So if you generate a character, and they'll have like a high concept, right? They'll have a high concept. And for those that don't know what a high concept is, it is kind of if you have to distill a character down to just like one central idea that would define that character. And so, like the high concept for one character might be smuggler with a heart of gold, right? And then they will also have a trouble or a problem that is following them, right? So it's like, so for your high concept, you have, a smuggler with a heart of gold, and then for his trouble, he's wanted by the authorities, right? Well, that covers a lot. And then depending on the approach, that they have, that could change the whole character right there. So say you go, well, I have a smuggler with a heart of gold and they're wanted by the authorities and they do everything with flash. They're flashy about everything, right? Well, that might be Han Solo. He likes going in there and just doing everything super flashy, right? if you pick something like they might be sneaky, right? Well, you're now starting to get a little bit closer to, say, Rick in Casablanca, right? It's still the same high concept and trouble, kind of wanted by the authorities, smuggler with a heart of gold, right? But he's more sneaky about it. He's not shoving it in everybody's face when he tries to get the letters of transit. He's hiding them and moving them around in a different way. He's definitely not Han Solo. And then if you pick a different approach, you might get Malcolm Reynolds, from Firefly. So that's something to look at. And it is just a really quick way to just generate ideas for characters. And with the Fate Accelerated method, I definitely wouldn't use that at all for any major characters. These are for your side characters, your extra, your extra guys in the platoon, that kind of thing. So that they're not quite stereotypes, but they'll fall into something you can easily remember and something the reader can also easily remember when you're setting something up and you're like, oh, this, John Boy has just stepped away from the platoon, and they know that John Boy does everything forceful, right? Based on what he's done before, that he's not going to do things sneaky, so they can kind of start to predict that what he's going to do, which readers like. And you have to pay it off also, of course. Or if you don't pay it off, you need a really, really good reason to not pay it off. But anyway, that brings us to generating story prompts, which is the next part of our talk. So we're going to leave RPGs behind, and now we're moving more towards board games and actual tabletop games. And not just games, but tools, I would say, because two of the ones I'm going to talk about are not games. So a lot of times people get stuck, you get hung up, you're trying to write, you're trying that day's writing session, and you can't get past the blank page. You just can't get going. And a lot of times what you need to do is just write maybe 200 words about anything, right? And it'll just break that kind of static inertia and get the old creative muscles flexing, right? So sometimes you just want to generate story prompts. Sometimes you just want to do some improv writing. Improv writing is actually a really good way of flexing your imagination, getting that, those creative muscles working out. So one of the tools that I would recommend is a game called Dixit. And Dixit is a game where it has a bunch of different artwork on cards, and you don't need to know how to play the game or anything like that. The game itself is actually pretty fun. But if you pick up Dixit, you don't even need to pick up the core game. You can pick up some of the expansions. But the point is, it has these kind of cards that are just covered in abstract art. And the art is actually really cool. So you just look at the art, deal yourself 5 cards, 5 Dixit cards, and then make up a story about those 5 cards. That's a really good way to do some improv writing. It's a really good way to do it with a group of people, especially other writers or whatever. If you're wanting to kick off a NaNoWriMo sprint or something, you could just do stuff like that. If you want to use it as an icebreaker, just say, hey, everybody write 200 words about this, right? And you just put up 5 images. And it works extremely, extremely well. It will get the imagination going. It flexes those creative muscles. The next thing is something you can literally keep in your pocket, and it is a great fun game. They have an app for iPhone and Android. It's called Story Cubes. And I want to say it's by Rory something. I will put a link in the show notes again. I apologize for this, but I'm deprived of notes right now. I think they're called Rory's Story Cubes, actually. That's what it is. And they have an app, so you can have them on your phone. They have a bunch of different cubes that you just roll. They're dice-based, and each die has 6 different things on it. They might have a tree or a planet Earth or an alien face or whatever. And they sell expansions. So they'll sell like fantasy-oriented expansions or science fiction-oriented expansions. And you just roll these and make up a story based on that. That's essentially what the game is, and that would also help you. Now, to get a little bit more structure in that, they've released a game called Untold, right? That is based on story cubes. It uses story cubes as the engine for Untold, for generating Untold. And in Untold, you're kind of making, I want to say that you're creative people trying to make up a television show. Now, you might be making one episode or a whole season, and it's up to you guys how you play, but it will lay out the story structure for you, which is very, very mythic. It's very hero's journey oriented, which is a perfectly good story structure, despite what a lot of people say. And it has been overused by Hollywood, but that's because, it works. That's, it generates a lot of money. So, Untold is kind of based on that. And it comes with a set of story cubes. So, if you want your most bang for your buck, I would go ahead and just buy Untold. It's actually a great group game to play, but you can play it solo if you're just brainstorming, just trying to come up with story prompts for improv writing. It's really, really cool. The last thing I'm going to talk about for improv writing is a game that I enjoy playing. It's not one you can play by yourself, unfortunately. It's called The Adventures of Baron Munchausen. And the last version that came out was a kind of like small hardcover book by Fantasy Flight Games. You might still be able to get it. But there are multiple different iterations of this floating around. There's actually some one-page rules that are floating around that are great. I actually keep a set of these rules in my back pocket, quite literally, all the time. Because if I'm hanging out with writers and we're bored or waiting for something to happen, you break this out, explain the rules, it takes about 2 minutes, and everybody starts playing. The idea is that everybody takes the persona of like a 17th century noble. And it doesn't have to be a real noble or anything like that. In fact, the crazier it is, the better it is, right? And you're going to start trying to one-up each other with these crazy tales and adventures of what you've done. Now, the really cool thing is that your fellow gamers are the ones that give you the prompts, right? So you're trying to come up with a story, and they'll just be like, oh, hey, Mike, you're a fantastic storyteller, and I love all the stories of adventures that you tell. Why don't you tell us about the time you saved the head of the Templars with a copy of the Necronomicon? And I'm like, oh, brother, right? So now I have to tell this story. And the more outlandish, right, it becomes, the better it is. Now, everybody around, like one of the rules of improv, everybody around the table can't say no. Like they can't say that didn't happen or that's not going to happen or try to sabotage your story. Like, well, wasn't Jack de Molay already dead when you did that? They can't really do stuff like that would end your story, right? But they could add a prompt to your story. So you go, hey, Mike, yeah, so you were using the Necronomicon and you had almost freed Jack de Molay. So did it surprise you that he was a time traveler or not? Did you know that all along? So you can introduce that now I have another prompt that I have to react to. That now Jack de Molay is a time traveler, right? And I can either roll with it or not because you gave me that out, right? And you play with some little coins and stuff if you want to. It's a very loose game. It's a lot of fun, very silly, and you can literally spend hours playing this game. I have seen at different conferences and conventions where they have gotten some big name writers together. And that was essentially, they played the game. They actually just played the Adventures of Baron Munchausen for the panel. And people, it was a standing room only in there to see how these writers would react. Well, my point with this is if you get into the habit of playing this, not only will it help you tell stories and think on your feet about telling stories, but it will help your narration. It will help all your stuff that you have to do in real time, because you won't be able to sit there and edit stuff. And it's interesting enough to see how when I was sitting in on that panel, I was not on that panel, I was sitting in on that panel and watching these expert storytellers, these big New York Times bestsellers, play this game live. All their stories fit a certain structure. All their stories made sense. They were as outlandish as they were. And they were stories about defeating the king of the moon with a pair of socks and stuff like that, As outlandish as they were, they all made sense. And so I highly, highly, highly recommend this for people to play. It is such a good time. It's a lot of fun, and you've got nothing to lose. So try to find a copy of those rules, and if I can find a link to those one-page rules, I will also put them in the show notes so that you guys can grab those. And then, so now that brings us past improv writing and just generating prompts to actual brainstorming. And a lot of times these are things you need to do just to get a story off the ground. Somebody will a couple years ago, I got asked to do, some tie-in fiction for a television show that was very popular at the time, but it's actually still ongoing. And I was honored to do that and everything. And I had watched the show. I wouldn't say I was a diehard fan of the show, but I was more than familiar with the show, and I knew what was going on. And that was one of the reasons my agent recommended me for these tie-in books that were going to come out for these. So, I knew the kind of format that the show went with, and it was kind of a mystery thriller. And I knew I was familiar with all the characters. So I hopped on Netflix and I rewatched like the top 10 episodes of this show that you should watch. I went online and there were all these links on, Screen Rant and stuff like that about, hey, these are the top 10 episodes you should watch. So I watched them all, and I watched a couple of my favorites that I remembered. Oh yeah, this episode was really good. And then sat down to write a book proposal based in this world and on this show using these characters. So I was having a hard time coming up with a plot just right off the top of my head. So I used one of these brainstorming tools I'm going to recommend called the Story Forge. The Story Forge is a set of tarot-like cards, but they have all kinds of stuff on them. Maslow's hierarchy of needs, the hero's journey, different character traits, Jungian archetypes, all kinds of different stuff are on these cards. And you will deal them like you would do a tarot reading. And it includes kind of a descriptor to decipher what you're doing, right? And you lay all these down, and it's not going to give you a plot. It's not going to give you characters, but it will definitely suggest things, right, for your subconscious to start working on. And that's what I was using it for. And I came up with a really good villain character based on that, and what I thought was an excellent plot, and sent it in. And unfortunately, they went a different direction. They went with somebody who had more tie-in experience than I did, which that's their prerogative. But it was a very, very useful tool. And that is, again, the Story Forge. I will include links to that in the show notes. The other one I want to talk about is Runes for Writers. It is a similar kind of thing where you're going to be kind of casting Nordic runes based on whatever plot you want to use or character you want to use or whatever. And it's a way of just kind of freeing your subconscious so that your subconscious can more directly talk to you, essentially. Works really well. I've had a lot of fun with it, generating some stories and everything for my own use. That is Mark Brehm, and full disclosure, Mark Brehm is a friend of mine. And it's his system that he came up with. And he's a very smart guy. He has a couple published novels under his belt as well. So check his stuff out. That's called Runes for Writers, and I will include a link to that stuff in there as well. And then that brings me to a game. Unfortunately, I think it's harder and harder to get at this point. It's called 99 Chances. And 99 Chances for me is the ultimate writer's game, because it was a very light RPG, but it had a bunch of different cards, 100 cards, that you would just sit there and deal out, and the cards had genres on them. So you could just deal, it would pull out this genre, and when you came up with a genre, you then had to pitch it to the rest of the table. Well, guess what you're going to have to do when you generate a book or other creative work, like a screenplay or something like that? You're going to need to learn to pitch. So pitching an idea that you're not emotionally tied to teaches you the mechanics of the pitch, so that when somebody asks you in a professional setting what your book is about, you don't sit there and go into autopilot like a deer in the headlights and rattle off your 25-word, prepared pitch that you sat and diligently memorized, because that's not what they want to hear. They want to have a conversation with you. So you want to be able to just talk about it, but hitting the same pitch notes as you would in, say, an elevator pitch that's 25 words long and exactly fits this exact formula, right? And by the only way you're going to get good at doing that is by practicing. So what I liked about 99 Chances is that you could sit there and you could just play the game by generating these offbeat genres, and then decide whether or not, that's what you want to play. So you can just go around the table and just constantly pitch different genres. And that alone is fun. But then you do the same thing with characters. And then as you go around the table, the person to your left gives your character that you generated a problem. So the cards all have benefits, problems on there. They have the different genres, and then they have numbers on them for probability, which comes down to at the actual game, the gameplay of it. It's a fantastic game. I think the only place you can get it now is maybe on eBay. I've reached out to the creator, but he has not gotten back to me, and his website is defunct, and the game company's website is defunct, so it doesn't look good. Which brings me to the last thing, which is kind of like 99 Chances, but not really, because it's not as in-depth. And it is a ridiculously fun game. And it is called Pitchstorm. And you guys really need to check this out. It's made by the same people that made Super Fight. So it has kind of a Super Fight, Cards Against Humanity kind of feel to it. But the idea is that you get a character card, and then you get a plot card, right? And you have to put these cards together, and you pitch it to a producer. And you only have a limited number of time. They actually have an app on the iPhone and Android that will count down until the producer receives a phone call and is distracted from your pitch. So you have 45 seconds to do your initial pitch, and it's timed, adds the pressure element to it, right? And then the producer will give you notes. Now, the notes are what make the game absolutely hilarious, because you might be, developing and describing a really awesome drama, and then they come back at you with can the hero use a Samsung Galaxy to solve the problem, because we have a product placement deal with Samsung. And so now you can't say no. You have to repitch your story with the hero using a Samsung Galaxy to solve the problem. and I can't recommend Pitchstorm enough. It is an absolute blast. It is really, really fun. And again, it helps you practice pitching, right? So that then when you go to your writer's conference or your speed pitching kind of event where they have all these different agents line up, and some events you get 5 minutes face-to-face with an agent, some you get 10. I really don't think you get more than 10 just because there's just too much, going on. But you can go in there and rattle off your 25-word elevator pitch that you've memorized diligently, and then when they ask you questions about it, you're probably going to fall flat because you didn't rehearse that stuff. Or you can go in there and have a conversation. Now, this is a little boastful of me, but whenever I've gone and pitched face-to-face, I've gotten a request for a full manuscript. So I'm pretty good at pitching in person. Not so good at query letters, but there's other stuff you can use to work on that. But I like pitching in person, face-to-face, because then my enthusiasm can carry over to the other person. And they can see how exciting and cool this story is because I'm that excited about it. And that's what Pitchstorm and games like 99 Chances afford you the ability to do, is you'll sit there and you will practice these things through the course of the night. You won't even realize that you're doing it because you're having fun. So I think that's going to wrap it up for me. I'm getting back into the springs and traffic is starting to pick up. So you just remember what your friend Jack Burton tells you when the poison arrows start falling from the sky. That's going to be it for me. All right, I'll talk to you later. Mike, out.
You have been listening to Quantum Froth Dispatches by Michael Haspel. Music and other cues are provided by The Fat Rat. The song you're hearing is Monody, featuring Laura Brehm. If you would like to support the podcast, please visit www.patreon.com/QFD. Thank you for listening, and we now return you to your mundane reality.